guys in the dark.
So I have a story to tell. I met a cute, long-haired metalhead guy on OKC several years ago. He was just my type, so I was pretty excited to meet him. We talked for a bit, added each other on Facebook, and then suddenly I started noticing that he's posting a lot of weird stuff. One day he randomly posted the entire Lord's Prayer, which I found weird because he wasn't religious at all. At least not that I know of. He also had posted about how miracles are real because one of his relatives had just recovered from a bad illness. I had logged back in a few hours later to find a long, rambling, terrifying message about how I was stupid, egotistical, and an asshole. The message says, I'm not a fucking Bible thumper. I'm also not a self-centered, egotistical asshole like you are, bitch. I'm tired of your fucking idiotic, atheist fucking opinions. If you must know, I do worship Satan. I don't care what you think about that either. I would have loved to have drank your blood myself, but I had a bad feeling that I would be full. Only with the self-pity. I used to be like you, in fact. My first degree was in AA, network technology. I used to work on computers, you know. Now I have a PhD. You're so smart. Ask me, what is my desertion? And what is it about? I won't tell you to go screw yourself. You've pissed me off so bad after I poured my heart out to be with you, and to tell you my hospital experiences. I couldn't stand to read another word of yours. Open up your mind and realize that there is more than just us here. You can take the Bible and wipe your ass with it. So I had blocked him, of course. I didn't think too much more of it, since he lived in Iceland, and I happen to live in the United States. I had recently unblocked him and looked at his profile once again, just out of curiosity, and was mildly horrified to see that he's currently living in Dallas, Texas. I live in Dallas as well. I really don't think he moved to try and find me or anything. I lived in a different state when we were talking, but still, that's too close for comfort. This happened to be on Plenty of Fish. I start talking to this girl who happens to be really cute and can keep a conversation flowing. We agree to meet up for a trivia night at a local restaurant. I show up about 15 minutes early. I sit at the bar to drink before she arrives. When she does arrive, she shows up with her best friend, which is no big deal with me. The weird thing is, the girl I am there to meet shows up in a miniskirt and a prosthetic leg. Not one of the ones shaped like a leg. It's a metal pole. I play it cool. Or at least I think I did. And I'm open-minded, so I stick around. It had turned out that she's a huge alcoholic, which is how she lost her leg. She's pretty much drinking 3 mixed drinks to my 1 beer. Her friend that showed up with her also happened to have a date showing up as well. So there I am, awkwardly sitting at this table with people I have never met, pretending to have a good time so that I don't look like an asshole for ditching a date with only 1 leg. The girls ended up ignoring us guys. They're having their own conversations. So me and this other dude end up talking about sports and stuff. We end up getting along pretty good. We all end up going to a dive bar down the street right after dinner for more drinks, because it so happened to be 2 for 1 that night. The nights end there. I agreed to give this girl 1 more date on the off chance that it was just a bad night for the girl, and she was nervous or whatever it was. Second date was even worse than the first date. She gets wasted, keeps accusing me of looking at other women, and is hitting on other people while we were out. I leave, and I never contact her again. I met a guy on OkCupid. We hit it off pretty well. After we hung out a few times, he came over to my place with a bottle of wine and a movie. He wasn't supposed to stay the night, but he lived about 45 minutes away. It had snowed earlier, and I lived in a very rural area with a lot of hills and curves. He decided that he was going to stay that night instead of driving home. This only irritated me because he didn't really ask me. He just decided on that. But the best part of the night was right before I went to bed. He was staying on my couch, mind you. He asked me if I should change my pad. I looked at him pretty quizzically, and he said, "You need to change your pad before you go to bed. You could get TSS." He proceeded to argue with me for a solid 10 minutes about whether or not I should change my pad. His argument was that he was an EMT and has a sister, so he knows all about these kinds of things. My argument was that I've had a vagina for 20 years, Needless to say, he went home the very next morning, and I've neither talked to him or seen him ever since. So after meeting online, I meet up with a girl at a restaurant. The conversation happens to be going well. She asks me where I'm from. I tell her that I'm from a city near there that has a rougher reputation. She lights up when I say this. She asks if I was in a gang and how many fights I got into. I laughed and said that I wasn't in any kind of gang, and I hate fighting. I did tell her that I got into a fight after leaving a bar a year prior. And I'll be honest, I never want to do that ever again, even though the fight was super lame. I ended up with a black eye after the tussle. I work in a fairly conservative engineering office, so I did find it funny when I told people I got my black eye in a fight when they had asked me about it. My date giggled at that. And then she said that she always wanted to get into a fight, but would hate to get hit in the eye. I told her getting hit in the eye is better than being hit in the mouth, because that shit does hurt, and it bleeds even if the punch wasn't even that good. She said that she didn't believe me on this. I said that I had older brothers. I preferred getting punched in most places other than the mouth. My date still didn't believe me. Then suddenly, she comes out with, "I want to find out," and then she proceeded to punch herself in the face repeatedly to see which area hurt the most. In the middle of the restaurant, mind you. On our first date. I asked her politely to stop, but she continued to do so. She did end up agreeing with me eventually. We hugged, and then we went our separate ways, never speaking to each other ever again. Okay, look. We all have our bad date stories. We all have had bad experiences that to us are the worst dates in history. But I'm a realist, and I'm aware that my stories probably pale in comparison to a lot of others out there. And thankfully, my crazy dating woes are probably funny in hindsight. But I couldn't resist sharing this one, because while I can now laugh my ass off at what has happened, at the time this occurred, I probably thought this was the worst moment of my life. Looking back, it was probably the most laughable moment of my life. I met a guy named Dave on Match. He and I are both rather busy with careers, so the fact that we talked maybe once or twice a week was fine for both of us. As time passed, things progressed, and we got to know each other pretty well. Needless to say, I was more and more comfortable with him each time we got on the phone or chatted on Skype. Since we Skyped about 50% of the time, this gave me a great chance to actually see him interact with me, and I must say, he was easy on the eyes to boot. After about 2 months had gone by, we finally got our schedules to sync up, so we could meet without interruptions. Dave lived about 1 block from a pretty cool hotspot in town, so we thought that it would be a good idea to stick close to home, since I lived only a mile from him as well. Dave suggested that I meet him at his place so that we could get acquainted, sit by the pool in his apartment complex, and just chit-chat for a little bit before heading out. I thought that this was a good idea because, honestly, he was very polite, easygoing, and very low pressure. He didn't give any indication that I had anything to fear or worry about, and after the 2 months of talking, I didn't have any problems meeting with him at his place, especially since we were going out at the pool and did not really spend time inside his place. I was cool with that. My only slight red flag was that after time, the conversation didn't really get kinky. But he was starting to throw around the sexual innuendos on occasion and made hints towards things that he liked sexually. Okay, that's no big deal. I get it. He's a guy, and I have to admit, I'm no prude. So while I didn't allow the conversation to get too crazy, I played along, but casually. I guess my playing along gave Dave the wrong impression, and here's why. I arrived at Dave's place for our date, got to his door, and was pretty excited to finally meet him. Well, I knocked, and it took him about 30 or 40 seconds to answer the door, which is actually quite a long time since his apartment really wasn't that big. To my amazement, Dave was completely naked, but, well, for the lack of better terms, was pleasuring himself as he answered the door. And I don't mean that he was just starting to do it either. He was actually very close to finishing. Again, for the lack of better term, he finished about 3 seconds after opening the door, right in front of me. He let out this grunt that could be heard a block away, and that's not all he let out. I have heard stories that come close to this one, but never this explicit. I think my jaw fell halfway to the floor. I was stunned, amazed, and slightly frightened. All I could say was, "Are you kidding?" I think I was 2 steps towards the door when I uttered those words, and I actually didn't hear Dave say another word. I just heard his door close. I got in my car and bolted from the scene. He texted me about 10 minutes later, telling me he had been so turned on by our conversations that he was beyond excited and aroused by me that he just couldn't help himself. He also mentioned that he thought that I would enjoy what I saw. Needless to say, while this was something that I wouldn't mind watching or seeing after I know someone much better, it was totally inappropriate at the time. I let him know that and asked him never to contact me again. Thankfully, he didn't. From now on, I think I'll stick to meeting in public for the first date. This story happened about a year ago, a couple of weeks after I broke up with my boyfriend of 2 years. I was on the receiving end of a breakup and was completely a mess. I was in college and living at home for the summer in a very small town during the course of these events. A friend was consoling me and creating my very first online dating profile for me, because gay men can sometimes think that more sex is the solution to everything. His intentions were good, and I have to admit that some of the men contacting me were very attractive. I really didn't know how to use the website very well, so I started to text a couple of guys that I had met. This is where Robert comes into play. On the surface, well, below the neck, Rob was about 6'3", a gorgeous man who competed in bodybuilding competitions. Unfortunately, his face looked something like an axe murderer. His teeth were messed up. He wore glasses with those really thin metallic frames, and his hair looked like his mom still cut it. I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt, and he seemed like a really nice guy. That first night that we texted, we probably stayed up until about 2 a.m. talking about our lives. I heard a few things which weren't really red flags, but are usually turnoffs in what I look for in a date. For a guy in his late 20s, Rob didn't have much of a career. He was a high school track assistant coach, and I wasn't really sure if he got paid for this job. Now on to sex. I'm a little bit embarrassed to admit this online, but I am a complete bottom. So when I look for a potential partner, it's important for me that he is a complete top. Anything else just doesn't turn me on. So when Rob admitted to me that he is a versatile top, which means mostly top, but sometimes likes it both ways, I have to admit, I knew I would never meet him. I'm a little bit shallow, I know. Anyway, I tried to be open-minded. The next day, he wished me a good morning and said that we could go on a date that day. I told him in detail how I was just broken up with and didn't really want to meet a guy for dinner and cry from the appetizer to the dessert. He understood and agreed, then asked me out 3 hours later, which was pretty odd. This creeped me out, and I stopped talking to him. Rob began to call me several times a day. What made this stranger was the fact that it was an everyday, at just a few specific times. At about 10:17 a.m. and 9:17 p.m. every day. Sometimes he would call 3 times in a row, but always starting at 10:17 a.m. Obviously, I never picked up the phone. Considering I texted Rob for less than a 12-hour period, this began to frighten me. I mentioned the story as a joke to another one of my friends who was a police officer, but he took it more seriously than I expected. He told me that I should delete the profile, which I hadn't thought of doing, and to be very careful. I deleted the profile right in front of him. 30 seconds later, I got a text in all caps saying, "Why did you delete your profile?" I was just startled. I can't say for sure, but it looked like he was monitoring me and my now abandoned profile on the website throughout the day. Getting more uneasy, my morning phone calls began to seriously worry me. Luckily, a week or so, roughly about 40 missed calls later, he seemed to finally be getting the message. I really wish that previous statement was correct. One morning, my mom walked in with the day's mail. She handed me a large manila envelope with a handwritten address that appeared to be scribbled by a child. I thought it was a piece of artwork from one of the several students that I babysit, so I opened it happily. I have never been more wrong in my life. Out of the envelope came a 2-page long type letter, a complete chat log of our conversation on the website, a complete text log of our SMS conversation, and a full 8x5x11 copy of my profile photo taken from the website. I should also mention I have absolutely no idea how he obtained my address. I also don't even know how you can make a text log without typing up the entire conversation itself. And he must have copied my photo from the website long before that. Pretty weird. I immediately began sobbing at the 20 pages of horror that fell out of that envelope. I will also admit that to this day, I have never read the typed message. All I know is that it ended with a huge, creepy smiley face. My mom saw that I was crying, and I told her that I was being stalked. She asked me, "Who is doing this?" And I gave her Rob's full name. What happened next completely sent me over the edge. My mom began crying too, and told me that Rob had emailed her, pretending to want to donate for charity. My mom began to freak out as well when he began to ask about her children, and she stopped the email conversation. Now both of us are crying. I called the local police department and told them that I had been stalked, and somehow the man had found my address. He was also contacting my family members. A police was sent out to our house, and he went through all of our documents, told us that although he had clearly become angry, he wasn't threatening violence, and there was nothing that the police could do. After staying until we had both calmed down and talking a few scenarios out, when we were walking the police officer to his patrol car, an unfamiliar car was parked across the street. It was Rob. After being such an emotional wreck from the day, for some reason, I didn't get too spooked in that moment. The police officer didn't realize who he was, but once Rob saw me standing with the cop, he probably got nervous, and I never heard from him again. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, like, and hit the bell for notifications on future videos, and become a stalker of the night. And I'll see you next time.